Okay, so let's look at this in more detail. So Alzheimer's as an iceberg. So we can still diagnose and manage Alzheimer's by using medications and allied health strategies to deal with the dementia. In terms of the symptoms, we can still use radiology to try and diagnose the atrophy in the hippocampus and neocortex, and we can still diagnose with pathologists the neuron aggregates and try to manage them with targeted strategies, though I don't think that'll work. None of that needs to change, I guess. But if we want to alter Alzheimer's in a systemic restorative sense, what we have to do is start looking at the lower layers of this metabolic iceberg and realize we have to restore the lower layers. And ultimately, that means therapies that alter the environmental factors at the bottom that trigger the impaired mitochondrial biology in the first place. That means for Alzheimer's, certain heavy metals, which are strongly associated with triggering it. That means elements of the modern dietary lifestyle. That means air pollution. That means chemicals and pesticides. They're all strongly implicated in this disorder. Low cognitive stimulation, physical inactivity, so insufficient exercise, and chronic social isolation, and poor sleep. All these things are strongly associated with the, Alzheimer's disease, and we can modify all of them. So Parkinson's, we can look at that one. So again, Parkinson's, we can still use medications to try and treat the motor symptoms at the top of this iceberg. We can still use allied health input. In the second level, we can still use radiologists to look at the brain and say, oh, this region's atrophied or that one is. And we can still use surgical techniques such as deep brain stimulation to help improve the symptoms related to that. And we can still use pathologists and to diagnose the alpha-synuclein and so on. But if we want to alter Parkinson's in a systemic restorative sense, we need to look at these 6 layers and try and restore all of them from the bottom up. So these therapies involve, again, altering the environmental factors. For Parkinson's, the strongest ones are certain heavy metals, pesticides, chemicals, the modern dietary lifestyle, physical activity, and social isolation. So a little bit different from Alzheimer's, but a lot of overlap. ALS, same thing. So the limb and bulbar weakness, we can still manage that, try to manage it with medications. We can still try to manage it with allied health input, speech pathologists, and so on. We can still diagnose it to some extent radiologically, and we can still try to use techniques such as gastrostomies and feeding tubes and things to help manage the symptoms that way. The neuron aggregates, we can still diagnose as those as we have. But if we're going to make headway in ALS, we need to manage the bottom of the metabolic iceberg. And that means looking at the things that trigger it, which again are heavy metals, pesticides, interestingly, electrical occupations, so perhaps repeated electrical shocks or electromagnetic fields can trigger it. Smoking, physical activity, and interestingly, excess cardiovascular exercise is a strong trigger for ALS. So yes, exercise can be taken too far if done improperly. So that's important to remember. Lastly, Huntington's. So Huntington's, we can still manage it as we are by trying medications aimed at the motor symptoms, trying allied health strategies. We can still use radiology to look at the changes in the brain. We can still look at the neuron aggregates and diagnose Huntington's by looking at the mutant Huntington protein. But if we're going to make headway in Huntington's, we need to realize that impaired mitochondrial biology is the thing that needs to be shifted and altered and improved, and we can do that. Now, the mutant Huntington gene is there, no question, but a lot of people think maybe that gene creates this mutant Huntington protein that is somehow toxic to cells. Well, it's almost certainly leads to impaired mitochondrial biology, but a lot of that impaired mitochondrial biology, I think, is just because the normal mutant Huntington protein isn't there. You've got an abnormal one, and we can maybe improve the impaired mitochondrial biology through other ways. And that's why I think even a genetic neurodegenerative disorder like Huntington's, we can use strategies to improve that without changing the genetics. So other things that are definitely associated with increased development or progression of Huntington's are the modern dietary lifestyle, low cognitive stimulation, and physical inactivity.